Cool. All right, so what you have to do is you have to evaluate your training program that you have created to try and improve at Ki-o-Rahi. All right, so you go back right to the beginning, you do Ki-o-Rahi, you then looked at the components of fitness of Ki-o-Rahi, the important ones. What were the important components of fitness of Ki-o-Rahi? We know this. Speed, good. What else? Agility. Cool, give me one more. Power. Previously, that's right, it was good. Okay, so those are the components of fitness that make you, or that are used in Ki-o-Rahi. Then you had to devise a training program to try and improve those fitness components. The one that we missed was aerobic fitness or aerobic endurance. And to do that, you created a training program that had 2 or 3 methods of training. So remember, method is an individual type training, circuit training, continuous training, resistance or strength training, applied metric training. Those are the main ones that we looked at. But at the same time, we investigated what we call principles of training, POT. And the main ones that we've looked at are intensity, how hard we're working. We measured that via heart rate and that thing called PER, or perceived exertion ratio, 1 to 10 out of 10. And from that, this is that word we were looking for, we were hoping if we were working hard enough, we were going to get overload. Overload is taking our body past what it's usually accustomed to, so that hopefully we get what we call physiological adaptation. So when something adapts, it changes. So for example, when you continuously train, do continuous training for a while, your body goes, oh actually, well, looks like you're going to be doing long runs for quite a while, so I better change so that your body might help us, the body can handle it a bit better. So it does things, it adapts, it changes. You get a bigger heart, your lungs become more elastic so that you can breathe better, get more oxygen in, all of those sorts of things. That's a physiological adaptation, and then that leads to hopefully improvement in Ki-o-Rahi. Alright? We looked at specificity. So what that means, just to remind you if you can't remember, when you train, if I was trying to improve aerobic endurance or mobility to, say, move for a long period of time, would I go and do, say, heaps of flexibility training?
No.
Okay, why?
Because it's not specific to what you're trying to get.
Good, so you've got to target your training or your method of training to what you want to get. So for example, a lot of you want to improve muscular power, so for a method of training, you quite rightly chose circuit training or maybe interval training. So that's being specific to your goal. So that's how we use specificity. You're also measuring intensity by heart rate. You all did it very well, and doing your perceived exertion ratio. So you were being really specific that you got a specific target heart rate range so that you knew you were working the right energy system. So that's one way that you can talk about that there. We also looked at, a lot of you talked about boredom or tedium. That's a principle of training. So some of you found that what you originally planned, Reese, stay with us please. What you originally planned was that you, it was boring. So you changed it up a little bit. That's a principle of training. And the last two that we kind of touched on last time was law of diminishing returns. Remembering that if you are a person who's not trained and you start training, your improvement's going to go up really steep. But the longer you train, your improvements are going to start to get harder to get or slow down a little bit. If you're a highly trained individual, so you've done sport all your life, you're always doing training, you might have seen or may not have even noticed much difference at all. That's because you're starting from a higher point than someone who's not trained, right? So when you come to say, was I successful? Did I improve? You might say, well, I improved a tiny bit compared to my classmates. However, I am a lot fitter than them to start with, etc., etc., etc. All right? And that's how you bring the law of diminishing returns into it, if you want to. And the final one was reversibility, where we tested when you stop training, after a period of time, the gains you get, you lose them. We all experience that. If you don't train or move, beginning of the season, you might go back to pre-season training and you haven't trained for ages and you feel really unfit. That's because the gains that you made the season before have gone. That's called reversibility. If you are a highly trained individual who's done training for ages and ages and ages, that reversibility or that loss of fitness is going to be a slower loss than if you are someone who doesn't do much training at all. So you might find that, because remember we did the test 2 weeks after we actually finished the training program. Some of you just dropped your fitness quite a lot, some of you not much. So that might explain why some people made big drops, some people didn't. So essentially what you need to do to get to merit is identify a method of training and explain how you used it and how it, what you were hoping to achieve. So for example, I chose continuous training because I wanted to improve my aerobic fitness or my aerobic endurance or my aerobic energy system, because that was going to help me last longer in a game of Ki-o-Rahi. The way I did that was, and then you describe to me your training sessions, okay? And then you say what it did for me. What were the positives of that? Well, my beat test or my yo-yo test at the end got better. That's an achieve for one of the logs. That's real basic. You all can do that. Where you start to get your merits is you must do what we call interrelationship. So for example, you do the same thing with your continuous training, but you say, I did continuous training to try and improve my aerobic endurance or aerobic fitness. The way that I measured and made sure that I was working to get overload was I measured my intensity by making sure that I measured my heart rate every time I did my training, during and after the actual training, so that I made sure I got overload. So that's an interrelationship right there. You're actually talking about how continuous training, and you use those two things together. You added them together to try and get an outcome. That's an interrelationship. All right? And then excellence is where you start to talk about, in relative depth, positives, negatives, and improvements you would make. Okay. So you might do what I've just talked about there, but you add in. So overall, my use of continuous training and intensity was positive because I improved in my yo-yo score. I felt better when I was playing Ki-o-Rahi. I was able to maintain a high intensity for longer. And I know that because, and you've got your scores that you've put into your training diary. A negative of it was boring. Running around the track, whatever, for 20 minutes, 30 minutes was really, really boring. And that then decreased my motivation. What would I do differently next time? Well, next time what I would do is, and then you would then give me some improvements to try and decrease that boredom. If you did that, following that structure, that would be excellence for one log, all right? Last bit, must do. You must do both logs. You must do two methods of training. So one log, the first log, you choose one method of training and one principle of training and try and make them work together, interrelate them. Then you do the second log and you choose another method of training and a different principle of training. So for you girls, what I would suggest is that this one here, you choose the two that you mainly did in your training program. You definitely talk about intensity and you definitely talk about specificity. I reckon those are the two main ones we used. But you might want to bring this stuff in a little bit later on down when you're talking about maybe positives and negatives. Okay, so that's me talking for ages. I can see your eyes glazing over, that's fine. I want to get you moving and get started on this. Have you got any questions before we go and get started? Okay, so final thing, resources. You've got your training diaries. You've got so these things, all right? You've spent a lot of time doing them. There's a lot of information there for you. You've got those A4 sheets here called Methods of Training Review. You started doing them as a group. That's there for you as well. You can take photos of those to make sure that you've got them at home. And last thing, you all did this. The components of fitness that you were trying to improve for Ki-o-Rahi and how you were going to do it. Shut it. So those are the resources. You've got Google Classroom, and you've also got me at the end of Google Classroom if you need feedback by putting a request in the assignment. Okay? Alright, so you stop there.